Okay, I think I'm recording now. So this here's a live classroom link. I thought I needed to go over the way Postgres does triggers. The book, you should be able to read through it and get all the questions and stuff at the self-test at the end. But to actually implement the AMI portion and get triggers working, probably need some extra help on that. So let's go over one of the style triggers here. I think for this example, we'll do a delete trigger. So basically, if we take something out of a table, we're going to move it into an archive table. So I'm going to use artist as the example. And if I delete an artist, I don't want the artist to be permanently gone from the database. I want it to be moved out of the artist table into artist_old. So my first step, I need to create the archive table. I'm just going to do a create table and do archive artist. Should be simple enough. And then follow that with the columns. The original artist table has an artist ID. And it is of type integer. The name is a varying character. And it's 120, it looks like, is the length. Got to remember the two closing parentheses. We've got to close that opening up there. So this here will create the archive table. I'm not worried with primary key, foreign keys, anything like that. This is just to hold what the old table held. So I'm going to execute. I don't know why that error is there. Nothing else in the table. I don't know why it gave an error. Okay, so executed the selection. That seems to have worked. So the table should be created. There it is. I had to right-click on tables for it to show up. So archive _ artist is now in there. So right now it's empty. And what we want to do is we want to create a trigger so that when I delete an artist, before it gets rid of the artist row, it records it into the archive artist table and then goes ahead and deletes it out of the original artist table. And the way Postgres will do that is you create a function that handles the data. So I'm going to create a function first. It's going to handle all of the steps required to put the old data into the archive table. So I'm going to create basically a trigger function. So create a function, and I'm just going to name it AR artist. So make sure it's a unique name, and that's just going to run all of the code in here. And what are we returning? So in the last chapter, we returned things like a table, or we return maybe a value like an integer or text or something. This is going to return a trigger. And just like the previous chapter, we'll use the dollar signs. So returns trigger. And then of course we'll have the begin, the end. We'll also have the closing dollar sign and the language. Procedural logic, Postgres, SQL. So I went ahead and built the standard structure of what a function looks like. And now the stuff here in between the begin and end is going to be the SQL code. And what SQL code, what are we wanting to do? We're wanting to take old data and put it into archive artist. So to put data into a table, the code for that would be insert. So insert into archive underscore artist. And I'm going to specify the column headings, artist ID and name. Just double check my spelling. Artist ID and name. And that is followed with values. And of course, the first value is going to be the artist ID, and the second value is going to be name. Now here's where it gets a little bit different with the function. Normally you'd put in some type of number, and then you'd have some type of words. Some words here. But now that this here is a trigger, it's acting on data that already exists. So we're wanting to take old data that's about to be deleted and put it into the new table. So I'm going to use the keyword here called old. I'm going to put period, and I'm going to put artist ID. So the old information out of the old tables row from the artist ID column is going to be represented by old.artist ID. And the old name, I mean, this is the data that's about to be deleted, is going to be put there. So old represents the data in the original artist table down here. So if we're going to delete a row of information, the old artist ID, the old name, those values, or that's how it's represented, that's how it pulls the information. So when you run the delete, it's going to basically pull that trigger and fire this off. And this here code will execute, and we want it to execute before the data is gone. So the old row, old name will be inserted in the archive artist table. That's the result of this function. So let's go ahead and execute that code. And let's see, why did we get that error? So I just ran it a second time. For some reason, I don't know that this studio is woke up. I'm having to run everything twice. So just hit the F5 to run it again. Notice it ran successfully the second time. So I'm not sure why that's going on, but it's now entered. So that function is in the system. Let's refresh. There we go. So now we've got a trigger function created. So the function is not assigned to any table yet, but it is a function that if a event happens, this code will fire off and run. So that's a little bit different than the way the book shows the SQL 2011 standard doing triggers. Postgres will use a function to create the procedures or code to run. The next step is to actually apply the trigger to the table. So what table do we want to apply this to? We want to apply this to the artist table. So if a delete is executed against the artist table, we want this function to run first before the delete finishes. So this is where we're actually creating the trigger itself. This is kind of like the bullet, I guess, the gun and bullet. And this here is the actual trigger portion. When it's pulled, it fires off. So now I'm going to actually create trigger. And I can name it maybe like archive artist without the underscore. That way it's a unique name. Now creating a trigger, you can do, we're not doing this on a view. So we have either before or after that we can specify. So does this trigger fire before something happens or after something happens? Well, we don't want the data to be gone, so we can't do it after. We have to do before. Before the data is gone, before what? What makes data gone in a table? Not removing a whole table, that's drop, but removing a row uses the delete keyword. So if we're going to use the delete keyword against the artist table, that's where this line comes in. So before delete runs, we got to specify on artist, because the trigger can be defined on one single table. So before delete is fired off on artist table. That's how we assign it to the table. So this trigger fires in that case. That's what line 13 is for. Now next line, what do we want it to execute against? We want it for each row. When you're deleting information out of a table, it's row at a time. So for each row that's going to be deleted, we want this trigger to fire. And then what do we want it to do? We want it to execute. In this case, we can't really create procedures in this version of Postgres, but they do have execute procedure as a keyword on the trigger. And the procedure is pulling, of course, a function. And the function is artist. So let's go ahead and execute. Seems like I messed something up in the other, yep, I did, the function. before I execute this, looking up here and thinking back, once this function fires off, it's got to return something. Right now, I'm not returning, returns as a trigger, but I'm not returning any value. So the data that would be deleted needs to be returned back to the statement. Let me go and write a statement down here. So if I want to delete from artist where or artist ID equals something. So if this right here executes, that's the delete. The trigger is going to fire, run this function. So this function is going to take the old data, insert it into the new table. And actually, I need to return the row that's being deleted. I got to feed it back. I got to hand it back to this statement so it can finish deleting it. I forgot to do that. So I'm going to drop this function. So I don't know why I have to do it twice, but I have to execute it twice. So I'll drop the function. Now I can go back and fix this portion right here. So I did leave something out. Functions are supposed to return something, and I left the return statement out. So what am I returning? There's three things I can really return in a trigger function. That would be new data. That would really be working on an insert statement instead of delete. I can return old data, which typically works on delete stuff. I want to return pass the old data back to this delete so I can actually remove it. Or I can return nothing at all. So in that case, if I run this and I return null, then if I want to delete, it would not take it out of the artist table. It would still put the row of information I was trying to delete into the archive, but if I return to null, it would not take it out of the artist table. In our case, we want to go ahead and remove the old data from the artist table. So I have to return the old values, and that means it kicks it back out to this statement. So we kind of got to follow along. Before delete runs, this artist function is going to run. So this AR artist puts the old data into the archive table, and then it returns the old values back to the original statement you're trying to run, and it completes the delete on the artist table. So let me go ahead and recreate this. I'm probably going to have to execute this twice. Yep. Okay, ran successfully. Now I'm going to create the trigger. Okay, ran successfully. Yours probably won't require to be running it twice. Don't know what mine's doing. Now, if I want to find an artist that's safe to delete. So before I actually run my delete, I'll select star from artist AR join album AL on AR highlighted, it should autocomplete. AL dot artist ID. Now I want to left join. I want to see all the artists, not necessarily all the tables. There's artists that don't have albums associated with them. That's what I want to deal with. Where I want to see the artists that are not associated with an album. So I'll put a where AL artist is null. Go and copy all of this real quick. Okay, so I'm going to pause the recording. Okay, sorry I had to jump out there for a little bit. We're recording again. So what I had to do was pause the recording, restart this program, and I'm going to try to execute this again. Okay, so I've got lots and lots of artists here, that 71 of them, they have no album associated with them. So I wanted to deal with only those. That way I wouldn't have to worry about deleting something and having a constraint issue happen, that it also want to try to delete the album, and then that in turn would want to delete all of the tracks they're associated with. So to avoid a cascade issue like that, I'm just going to find the artists that have no associated data in the other tables and delete them. So we're going to delete artist ID 25. Let's look at the archive table. Archive table is empty. So I'm going to execute and delete artist 25. So it's going to take artist 25 out of the artist table and place it into the archive artist. So it executed the selection. If I look at the artist table, I see that 25 is no longer in the list. If I execute the archive artist table, I see that it was moved over into the archive. So that is how triggers work. And I set up here, if you're dealing with different trigger types. So old is typically what you're using when you're deleting. New is what you're doing for inserts instead of deletes. And then new and old is typically when you're doing an update statement. So you want to update, you're going to change maybe the name of an artist. You may change it from Prince to the artist formerly known as Prince, and then back to Prince again. If any of y'all are old enough to remember that fiasco. So on an update statement, you may have new and old data to deal with. So hopefully this here will give you a good explanation of how Postgres does triggers and help you deal with the AMI work. Next week, we are going to continue working on functions and triggers. The quiz next week is over functions and triggers. I believe we have that scheduled for Wednesday class. So I plan to have another live session on Monday to go over more triggers. We may actually do an update where we deal with old and new data. We'll probably also cover the AMI questions and make sure everybody is comfortable doing with the functions and triggers for the AMI homework this week. I'll probably also assign another small little bit of AMI and study for the final. So we've got our last quiz before the final. The final is just going to be a combination of questions out of all of your old tests and quizzes that you can view right now to study. And the final will be, I think, on Friday, the May 8th at 8 o'clock. So we'll have that scheduled. And let me know if your work or something schedule doesn't allow you to take it during that time as soon as possible so we can get an alternate time scheduled. So no more questions. I think we'll just end this live session. And I will see you all on Monday.